So we're facing right now an uncertain future, and we're trying to manage anxiety when normal is gone. How are we going to do this? How are we going to manage our own anxiety in terms of stress, confusion, and loss of what's normal, of what we've known our whole lives, and then support our kids in this process? It's extremely taxing. COVID isolation and reintegration are questions we are asking ourselves all the time. What's safe and what's not? How do we assist our kids in socializing appropriately and managing their frustrations and disappointment about the summer? How do you get through this summer without pulling your hair out? You're working from home, perhaps you're being laid off, maybe you're dealing with housing, food, and job insecurity. It can all feel like too much. And so today, I want to talk about how to deal with this anxiety and how you can pivot. And welcome to Lynn and Danielle, as well as Tammy, Shedley, Laura, Jim, everybody. Thanks so much for tuning in. It's great to have you. So I'm going to start with some comments from the recent attitude survey. And there were a number of different kinds of comments and questions, and they fell into some themes. So I'm going to start with the first theme, which was overwhelm and exhaustion. Someone wrote, the triple whammy of the pandemic, the economy, and now the protests is exhausting. I've lost focus and productivity, and some days I feel overwhelmed and hopeless. So let's not beat around the bush. It is overwhelming. It's overwhelming and it's a lot for us to bear. And many, many people are feeling overwhelmed and exhausted. Zoom exhaustion is a real thing. You have to pay more attention when you work online because you have to focus harder on fewer visual cues to get to read what's going on with the other person, because normally we get a wide range of cues from another person. We read body language, we rely on sounds as well as visual information. And now we have to rely so much more on visual information that we are processing in a very small picture. This is stressful, not just for our eyes and our brains, but also for our emotional selves. Um, uh, we are also, if we're in Zoom meetings, trying to process simultaneously information from multiple people at once within the confines that I just described. And this is further stressful to our brains, particularly for brains who struggle with ADHD and executive processing challenges. These brains need often more time to take information in, figure out what it means, what it's trying to communicate, and then to respond. And that's harder to do online. And so there's a sort of constant level of pressure, of stress that we are all experiencing. How can you balance the stress? How can you address your exhaustion? So I think the very first thing people have to start to do is to have some type of a daily non-screen nurturing activity that feels like self-care. It's easy to be on your computer for the day, have dinner, and then watch TV at night, but that isn't actually going to enliven you. I myself am struggling with actually making myself shut my computer down when it's lunchtime, read the newspaper, sit outside, and take a walk, to give myself permission to extricate myself from that online world, which persists constantly. So, what would it look like for you? I'd like you to send in your responses to have a daily non screen self care activity. I want to hear from you right now. What would work? What would help you? What would a non screen self care activity look like? So Jennifer says she's suffering from insomnia due to anxiety. I'm sorry to hear that. I myself have suffered from insomnia at times. Could you tell me a little bit about your worries? That would be helpful. So, again, I want you to send in your comments about what is a daily non-screen self-care activity that you could engage in. It's really important for us to try to do this, not just for our spirit, but also for our brains. Our brains need a break from looking at the screen. When you're looking at a screen, you're hyper focusing on maybe a 3 foot distance. When this whole thing started, I remember saying to my friend who's a computer consultant, my eyes hurt. And he said, look away from your computer. You need to look at a wide field of information. Look out your window. And I did that. It wasn't quite enough. And so what I realized is I have to take a walk every day where I'm not looking at the screen. So, Jeremy, so I hear from some people, exercise helps. Absolutely, absolutely. Exercise is so good for you physically, but also for your brain because when you're exercising, it generates endorphins and you're bathing your brain in these endorphins, which make you feel good. It gives you a reprise, a break from the on screen monotony and the life monotony right now. Laura says she does yoga with you on that one. Can you find a weekly class that you can do? There are lots of great yoga videos on YouTube. How could you make an agreement with a friend that you're going to Zoom share the yoga class so maybe you're not doing it by yourself and having that commitment will actually help you do it. Jeremy says, my 11-year-old daughter was recently diagnosed with ADHD inattentive type this past year, and we're learning every day. How can I help her soothe herself with her emotions and anxiety before bed? Um, Lynn, I'm going to get back to that, Jeremy. Lynn says probably activity in crafting, cross stitch, quilting, or scrapbooking. Yes, that's great for a few reasons. One is you're using a different part of your brain, right? Your right brain. You're thinking in images and you're piecing things together like you do when you do a puzzle. And two, you're not looking at a screen. You're also completing something. One of the things that's really hard about all the screen activity is you're not actually making anything. And I think people, now that we've sort of lost a certain kind of interpersonal interaction, not being able to make something, we're drifting without feeling a sense of productivity. You can spend hours on the computer and walk away and feel like, oh, I'm glad I did this or that, but you're not actually holding anything. So I want to encourage you to maybe consider taking up a hobby. I like that idea, Lynn. Read a book. Always great to read a book or draw or color. I'm a big fan of those coloring books for adults. Or make your own lines and color within them. But again, we're going to nurture that right side of the brain to help us think in a different way. Julie says bike riding, yoga. Oh, hi, Julie. Um, um, and I go for walks. I use facial masks while I rest. Excellent. Ooh, double duty. I love that. And do arts and crafts projects with my children. That's fantastic. And I think if you're struggling for ideas about arts and crafts projects, I think I saw something on Attitude about that. You can certainly Google arts and crafts projects with kids, home easy ones, and pick and start that up. Biking outdoors, walking, exercising in a pool if you have access to a pool, swimming, fishing, indoor dance. Yes, dance fitness. Love it. And you can also listen to music while you're doing it. How fun. Julie says you massage your feet on a lacrosse ball while on Zoom calls. Helps me relax. I love that idea. Lynn says she's not accomplishing anything. Jennifer says making pottery. Wow, that's great. That's a great idea. So I want to go back to Jeremy's questions before I move on to the next set of issues that people brought up. And Jeremy asked, how can you help soothe a child with her emotions and anxiety before bed? That's a great question, an 11-year-old. So a lot of kids are very anxious right now. They're worried. They're worried about their family's health. They're worried about the health of their friends. They're not sure what's safe and what's not anymore. Things that used to be second nature are now and easy for them. They have to think about. They're concerned perhaps about the planet. They've been aware of what's happening in the news, and issues of injustice and racism are something that 11-year-olds are certainly thinking about. So I think there are a couple ways that you can deal with this. The time before bed needs to be a time of calming. And so that's not a great time to start a conversation about any kind of charged subject. I think if your daughter wants to talk about something at that time, write it down and say, here's when we're going to talk about it. That'll be tomorrow at dinner. This is a time to slow down. There are lots of great meditations that you can do together, including visualizations. 11-year-olds are great with their imagination, and so you can do a relaxation visualization that can help them. You're drifting on a cloud, you feel the sun on your face. I'm going to count to 10. We're going to relax your toes, work your way up. That can be very helpful. Emotions that are high before bed are very challenging because we want to calm the system down. So, is there an activity that your daughter finds soothing? Maybe some stretching. Maybe you rub her back. Maybe she needs to write down her worries and put them in a journal, and then tomorrow she can pick them up again. For some younger kids, I create a worry motel or a box. You write down the things you're worried about, you put them in the box. Tomorrow you can pick them up, and they'll still be there for you. We want her to come up with some language to soothe herself. And so if you can help her come up with a statement or two, I'm afraid about getting COVID, but right now I'm safe in my bed. Something like that, a few things that she could do. Write these down and put them up around her room. That will help her. So I want to move on to the next series. A few more comments have come in. Renee, water the flowers. I love that. I have some serious deadheading to do myself in my garden. Pluck out a few weeds and look out at the daily changing landscape around the house. That's a great thing to do because this is summer. Every day something is different. There's blooms, there's weeds. For those of you who live in cities, perhaps there's a community garden you could participate in, or just walk around in a park and notice what's opened today. A few attitude I was posting some art therapy projects you can do with your kids. So let's move on to the next general area of concern, and this is motivation issues. I get really down on myself when I can't seem to bootstrap myself to get going. My friends are able to. It's easy to spiral into frustration, anger, and self-loathing when you can't seem to muster up the energy or momentum to complete things you want to or have to do. Okay, so my first thing I want to say is be kinder to yourself, please. The online world fosters comparisons that make us all feel worse about ourselves. And because we're online a lot, we're susceptible to these comparisons, and they're not real. No one can live up to what that ideal is posted online. I remember one of my 15-year-old clients said to me at once, no one ever posts on Facebook that you have like a mid-menstrual breakout on your face or that you got a C on your last paper. No, people don't. What they're posting is their next great idea, their beautiful dinner, and how they're managing. I would like to say to you here and now, you know what? It's okay to have lost focus and productivity. It's okay to struggle with motivation. I was talking with a friend of mine who's a musician, and she said many musicians have lost their motivation. They're struggling because they've lost the thing they love the most, playing with other people. Do you know that the singers, the people who understand about singing, have said that you have to be 27 feet away from someone to sing safely during COVID. Choirs across the world have been decimated because of this. So yes, it is absolutely normal to lack motivation. And for people with ADHD who struggle with motivation, it's doubly difficult. So, what I would encourage you to do is to meet procrastination and lethargy by doing the following things. Break your tasks into smaller chunks. Schedule 10-minute breaks every hour or two when you leave the room and your computer. Set an alarm for that break and leave yourself a note of what you were doing so that you can get back to it. Hydrate. Go outside or open the window and stick your head out. Get some fresh air. I'd like to hear from you. What are some of the motivational challenges you're experiencing right now? What is hard for you to do? And then we'll brainstorm some ideas about how to deal with that. So, again, what are some of the motivational issues you're struggling with yourself and with your family, particularly in this level of uncertainty when normal is gone? Another theme that came across for people, I'm going to move into this while I'm waiting for your responses, is increased forgetfulness. One person wrote and said, I find that I'm way more scatterbrained, even on my medication. I'm forgetting stuff way more often, and it's extremely frustrating. And this should not be happening. I'm in my 30s. Is the anxiety and stress and the worry enhancing some of the ADHD symptoms, even though I'm taking my medication? Yes, it is. I often say I'm in my 30s with Alzheimer's because that's how bad it is. You do not have Alzheimer's. What you have is a stressed out ADHD brain. And stress affects your brain significantly, particularly your working memory. Emotions drive working memory. That's how we attach importance to things and we recall it. So, whatever intense feelings you're having, whether it's anxiety, depression, stress, tension, disappointment, your already weaker and challenged executive functioning skills will be further compromised. Lower your expectations about your performance a bit. I'm not saying give yourself a pass not to do anything, but maybe your expectations are a little bit too high for yourself and possibly for your kids. Use tools to build working memory skills. Alerts, reminders, technology can be your friend. Post-its, brain breaks to integrate information. And when you're giving instructions to a child who has ADHD, make eye contact, state your direction, and ask them to repeat it back to you. Not once, but twice. I call this the rule of 3 because that second repetition is what helps with the encoding in the working memory. So I'm still looking to hear about some of your personal motivational challenges. Lynn says it's hard to get up off the couch and engage in life. It sure is. And it's also a little scary. I noticed that this week when I took my day or two off, I got in my car and I drove out to a park that's about 20 minutes away to take a walk with a friend. And I was weirded out. I'm like, wow, look at this. I'm in my car on the road. And then I put my mask on and we took our walk. And And I think that's really important. It also feels weird. Then I went to do an errand. I took my clothes to the dry cleaner. That felt strange. So not only is it hard to get up off the couch, when you do, there's a whole flood of emotions like, am I going to be safe? What do I have to remember? You have to take it slow enough so that you can get what you need and double check yourself before you leave the house. But try to make an effort to get off the couch and have one goal a day. One small goal a day. I'm going to go to CVS or the pharmacy and get some sunscreen so I can sit outside. I'm going to go to the dry cleaner. I'm going to walk in a place I've never been before. Small goals lead to small accomplishments, which lead to confidence. And that's going to help you get motivated. When you've been able to do something successfully, you'll start to get feel empowered to do something else. So there are a few comments here. That's great. Laura says, keeping my 6-year-old engaged in online learning. He doesn't seem to value it in the same way as face-to-face learning. Nope, and he won't. If you're 6 and you have ADHD, you're likely in some ways to be younger than your 6 years, sometimes up to 3 years younger in terms of your executive functioning. If it's hard for adults with and without ADHD to pay attention online, it's triply hard, more than triply hard for kids, right? You know, there's so many, it's not that engaging. Kids, part of the thing that helps kids with ADHD at school is being in a peer group where other people are modeling with their behavior and their attention what to do. It's getting feedback from your peers, like, hey, turn around, or shh, or something like that. Or the teacher will call your name and say your eyes on my eyes or something like that. They're missing these cues, and so it is going to be hard to pay attention for online learning, particularly if the online learning isn't engaging. They may be able to pay attention for short spurts, and if they can, let's celebrate that. Laura also says, I'm personally struggling with feeling unproductive even when I've been working online all day. What you said about not having something tangible makes a lot of sense. Yes. So when we're online all day, what we feel is drained at the end of the day. We've been hyper focusing on a small screen, trying to read cues from people, typing, whatever it is we're working on, bringing images together, whatever you do online, your focus is constant. And so we have to give our brains time to refuel. We also have to give ourselves something that we can start making. This is a great time to do that. And you don't have to be like, oh my God. Martha Stewart is what I'm thinking. You don't. I'm not talking about that level of homemaking skills. You can just do something that brings you some joy and pleasure. And who cares if it doesn't look perfect? That's not the point. Um, Jeremy, yes. Executive functioning skills mature more slowly for girls and boys with ADHD, up to a 3-year lag in certain skills over time. The development is not linear, but if you see your 6-year-old sometimes acting like a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old, that is typical. Let's see. Susan says, just got online. Welcome, Susan. Nice to have you. Piles of paper. I start this, then I must read this. Oh, this is important. I have to read that. Time goes out the window. So one of the things that happens right now is we are flooded with information and resources, right? And it's hard for us to differentiate what's urgent, what's important, what do I pay attention to now, what should I pay attention to later. So what I want to encourage you to do is to try to take your piles and, if you can, put them in categories. Today, tomorrow, maybe never, right? That's one set of categories. Another could be by theme, right? Things related to COVID, things related to parenting, things related to improving my relationship with my kids, or nurturing my friendships. And these are not necessarily work topics, but if you can separate your piles and then give yourself a limit. I will read one thing. I don't care how interesting the next thing looks. I'm only going to read this one thing per day. This is the hardest thing for a lot of people with ADHD to do, and yet it's the most important. Because what happens is you get an idea and you read something, and then you go down the rabbit hole of that idea. The problem is you're down the rabbit hole, and then 3 hours later you come up for air. So we want to try to you want to try to figure out how you can limit yourself, and I would encourage you to do that by looking at the urgent and important matrix. It's a very famous matrix, the Eisenhower matrix. So urgency is about time, and importance is about value. So try to figure out which of those piles is urgent and why, and which is important. Divide things into that 4 square: urgent and important, urgent, not important, important, not urgent, not urgent, and not important. That would mean you probably would never get to it, but put it there anyway. Renee says, I follow a minimalist website, and the individual who runs it frequently says action creates motivation. I count down from 5, then get up and do what is weighing on your mind. I struggle with the overwhelm of decluttering, especially keeping up with the daily demands, of raising a behaviorally challenged son. So I think that's a great idea. Action creates motivation. So what you could say is action creates motivation creates action, right? So you decide to act. You're just like, okay, I'm going to do a small thing, and then you notice that when you're up and about, you might feel motivated to do something else. That's great. Anna Alicia, welcome, says, any suggestions on how we can redirect our 8-year-old child when he starts to pick on his siblings, ages 6 and 2.5? He is so sweet and caring with them sometimes, but when he's overwhelmed, tired, and aggravated, he taunts them, and we can see he's stuck in the aggression because his eyes are glossed over, he's angry, and he spirals out. That's so interesting, because the very next topic I was going to was angry kids and outbursts. And I just want to share this other comment. The off-the-cuff anger and anxiety that comes from my almost 13-year-old daughter is scary. It feels like it comes out of nowhere. Even if I ask a very basic question or something I felt couldn't get a negative reaction, sometimes it does get a negative reaction, and an angry one. I'm trying to back off, but I still need to be a parent. So what we want to talk about is right now, kids are angry. They're angry, they're discouraged, they're frustrated, they're confused, they're worried, and some of them are feeling really hopeless. So anger is the bodyguard for fear and sadness. When a child is angry, that is what's on the top level, okay? Underneath, we have hurt. Underneath, we have sadness. Underneath, we have fear. And often what we have is a certain level of self-loathing, okay? So when kids are angry, when your older sibling is picking on his younger siblings, he's doing that because he's angry, and he can pick on them as an outlet. He can make himself feel better and superior by provoking his siblings and seeing them react. He's exporting his anger. Your 13-year-old is exporting their anger onto you, right? And you are importing it. And now a 6-year-old and a 2.5-year-old are naturally going to be provoked and imported because they don't have the maturity, the resources, the organic physical brain development to do something different. So when your child is starting to taunt your other children, that's the time. if you can, where you put your arm around him and you take him into another room and say, hey, you know what? You're starting after your siblings. Talk to me about what's going on. I can see that you're angry. Describe to me why you're angry and maybe listen. Of course, listen, but maybe suggest that underneath something else might be going on. He may or may not validate that, but he needs to be taken away from your kids, not yelled at, but in a loving way and say, I can see that you're losing it. How can we regroup? For your teenager who may not very well let you touch them or do that, your daughter, we have to really engage in both cases with empathy. Your daughter's angry and she has every right to be. Teens, kids of all ages have lost so much, and their developing brains are just not mature enough to handle and process everything that's going on. They're angry and they're turning to you, their parents, because you are the people who make things better. Right? When they were younger, you soothe them, you help them. They're mad at you in some way. It's completely, irrational for not being able to correct this, for not helping them make this situation more tolerable. So what we have to do is validate their experience, whether you're 6, whether your kids are 13 or 17 or 25. Use reflective listening. That includes observation, what I call attentive awareness. You observe and you reflect that back. I can see that you really feel cheated, that other parents are letting their kids go to this bonfire and I won't let you. That really, I get why that feels unfair. Sit down with them, at a calm moment, a different time, not in the heat of the moment, and make an agreement about how you can connect daily, where you get to ask a question of the day and she can respond. When my daughter was 13, I would ask her one question a day. That was our agreement, and she had to answer it honestly, and that was the information I got, and that actually helped because she stopped feeling nagged, and it sort of opened the door, right, for times when she would talk to me. Of course, she was kind of a sassy tween, so my first question was, can you tell me a high and a low of your day? And she looked up from her phone and she said, that's 2 questions. So, be careful about your question and, agree that you'll, give her time. Also remember that teens are going to share with you and talk about things when you're in the car, if you're taking a walk and you're not looking directly at them, but you're just walking together. If you're engaged in a project, you're cooking, maybe you're folding laundry. Let them put some music on and hang out with them. Okay, teens are really, really struggling right now. Younger kids are struggling, of course, as well. But teens are used to having a little more autonomy and independence. They're used to getting on the bus or walking to school, spending the day with their friends. You're not supervising them. They love that, right? Maybe they play a sport after school, or maybe they're allowed to walk down to the pizza joint a block away. Now that's changed, and as we open up, many parents are afraid of trusting what their kids are doing. They want to make sure that their kids are actually following through, and that your child has to show you with their behavior that they're doing that. Okay, bunch more questions and comments. Fantastic. One of the things we struggle with most with our ADHD daughter is anger. She's a very high achiever, but as parents, we see extreme outbursts of anger and self-loathing. I'm so sorry. That's very common, particularly for girls, smart girls with ADHD. We work hard at identifying things before there is an explosion. Good for you. But we can't seem to address things fast enough. It's 0 to 100 mph in the blink of an eye. It sure is. How do we intervene sooner? When we intervene when she's at 100 miles per hour, she refuses to use any of the techniques her therapist gave her. Once she's at 100 miles an hour, there is no way you can intervene successfully. That what's called for then is a time apart. Everybody has to calm down. You can't have a conversation or use tools when you are activated that way. You know, it's like the tiger in the jungle. When you see a tiger and you're running in the other direction, you're not ready to have a conversation about the pros and cons of, tiger welfare, or, you just want to run away. And so that's what happens in our brains when people get angry. It's that same fight or flight response. And so I think it would help if the agreement when she's angry is, this is a good time for a time apart. Let's gather back in 15 minutes when we've recalibrated. It takes about between 10 and 15 minutes for that amygdala, that stress reaction, to calm itself down. So you're not going to be able to predict all the various things that make her angry. All you can work on is the process of dealing with that anger. And this is true for a high achieving high school girl with ADHD, but it's also true for an 8-year-old. In the moment, what you have to have is a plan for success, right? And that is what you're going to rely on. And you have to put into that plan, clauses for non cooperation and pushback. Renee says, I just want to thank you for your live videos. It helps with the reminders and to be realistic and stay grounded. Well, you are most welcome, Renee. So I would like to ask if anyone else is struggling with angry outbursts with their children or struggling with their own anger. Tell me about the angry outbursts in your house, whether it's getting up to here faster and losing it and then regretting it and not feeling good about yourself, or your kids getting up to here really fast and then losing it and not feeling good about themselves. One of the things that happens with anger, particularly for ADHD brains, is that there's often a struggle for emotional control, right? We get in, people feel intense emotion, and they come on very fast. The kids I've talked to with ADHD refer to them as a tidal wave of emotion. They're like trying to keep their head above water while it's swirling all around them. So what's important, particularly now, whether it's anxiety or anger, is to come up with strategies not in that moment. And probably 3 is plenty that they can choose from, and what to do if they don't want to choose. One of those strategies must be being able to take some time apart. Younger kids might want an arm around their shoulder, a hug, reading a story that will help them come down. But as kids get older, what they often need is to just remove themselves and to be with themselves. Maybe they want to play Lego, maybe they want to read or color. And so we want to try to help them channel that anger appropriately. Maybe they could just talk into their phone, into the voice memo, on all their angry feelings. But we have to come up with some appropriate ways to express anger. I worked with one family, and their child would slam doors, break things. And what we agreed on, because they had the room in their house to do this, and they had the means to do this, is they bought like a punching bag. And so and they hung it in their basement, and they got him, something that he would just hit that bag. And that way he'd take time apart and he'd hit that bag, and he was able to get that angry energy out. We have to help kids. Sometimes I've worked with some kids who basically go down and they get on a bike trainer, go down if they have a basement, or go to another room and they get on the bike trainer, or if there's a little treadmill. Sometimes if kids will go out for a run. They'll put on music very loud in their room and dance around. We want to give them positive ways to let that energy out. So Sarah says, we've had some destruction of our property happen from one of our children when the emotions got too heated. I'm sorry to hear that. I want to encourage you to try some of the things I just said. I also think that we want to teach kids how to make amends for their when they do angry, inappropriate actions. And so the making amends would be helping to repair what's broken, contributing financially to a repair. And if a repair means calling someone into the house to fix it, sit with you while you make the phone calls, be at home, away from something they might otherwise be doing when that person's there. Stay present. We want kids to understand that there are consequences to their actions that affect everyone without shaming them about having anger, because anger is a natural emotion. It's how we express it that gets us into trouble. Amanda says, my 8-year-old son goes from 0 to 60 in no time. We had a complete over the top meltdown over a cheeseburger this week. Wow, that sounds terrible. Screaming, yelling, destruction. What does reach them in this moment? We are new at it. So sometimes in that moment, it is extremely difficult to reach someone. They are off the cliff, right? And so what you have to do is in advance say, when you're heading off that cliff, I'm going to count to 3. And I'm a big fan of Magic 1, 2, 3 by Thomas Phelan. I think it's a great book. I counted throughout my kids' childhood and sometimes into their adolescence. I did count for my son when he was 13 at one point, and he's like, Mom, I'm 13. You're counting? And I said, that's a 1. I can't believe this. All I want to do is, that's a 2. And by the time I got to 2.5, because I always gave him that extra half, he had gone into the other room to remove himself from his sister, who he was really taunting, actually. And so he went into the room for 10 minutes and he came back because I was really clear. If I get to 3, you will not earn the privilege of watching March Madness. And I got to 2.5. And he ran into that room really fast because he knew I meant business. So counting to 3 is actually a great thing, particularly for kids with ADHD, because it gives them a little bit of time to regroup, and they need that time, right? Because they're in that emotional tidal wave. So in a calm moment, talk about how to use Magic 1, 2, 3, and then use it. Follow through on what you say you're going to do. If you operate that sometimes I follow through and sometimes I change the rules, your kids are going to basically believe the rules that you establish or the agreements that you make don't matter. That's different than, hey, I broke a glass on the floor, I have to sweep it up. There's an exception right now. That's different. But, if you decide, you're playing your computer game and you're not actually finished, so I'm going to give you 10 minutes. What they learn is if I tell them if I push hard enough, I can have that extra 10 minutes. So we have a few more minutes left. Jessica says, my son was punching holes in his walls. After structure, routine, and him reading books for kids his age to help coping with his emotions when he can't control them, he's a very different kid. Jessica, that's fantastic. And if you wouldn't mind sharing a couple of those books, that would be great. Not to be shamelessly self-promoting, but I have heard from some parents who've read my book that or bought my cards, that the quotes from kids who are experiencing these challenges can be very helpful for particularly older teens to read and get a sense of. I worked with one teen who did that, but there are so many resources for teens. Certainly I'm not the only one, so I would encourage you to share those, please. Chandra